So on this Sunday before Thanksgiving, when many of you are anticipating spending Thanksgiving with family or friends, we hear some pretty jarring words from Jesus. Jesus says, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciples. And whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." I was talking about how hard this passage is with someone who goes here to Good Shepherd, and he said, "What? That's in the Bible? Jesus says that?" He says, "I know we've talked about how Jesus says, 'Take up your cross and follow me.' But the part about hating your family? Is that really in there?" It is. Jesus says these words. He talks much more about taking up the cross and following him. But in this particular passage, in the middle of Luke's gospel, Jesus talks about hating your family and giving up all of your possessions. Hating your family. That's harsh. These are harsh words. I think the subject heading in the Bibles that you have in your pews, and maybe in the Bibles that you have at home, says the cost of discipleship. That's what this passage is often called. And at this point in Jesus' ministry, which is halfway through Luke's gospel, large crowds are starting to follow him. Many people are coming out to hear what Jesus is trying to say. And if Jesus is trying to gather as many people as possible, why doesn't he soften his message? Why doesn't he just come off as kind and cuddly and friendly and positive? Why is he greeting people with such harsh words? I think maybe Jesus should have gone to marketing school. Then he could have said the message that people would want to hear. Maybe instead of talking about how much it will cost to follow him, he could have just focused on what people would gain. But maybe Jesus actually understood who he was and what his mission was, and he was not afraid to be honest with people and tell them what the cost of following him would be. He uses this word hate. But yet, and this word is actually, it should get our attention, but not for the reasons that we think. The modern definition of the word hate is to be hostile towards, to have animosity against, strongly dislike. That's what our modern definition of the word hate is. But back in that time, in the biblical understanding of that word, it had a different meaning. Hate meant to turn away from or to detach yourself from. So it's still not a positive meaning, but what Jesus is asking his followers and also us today who are hearing this is not to be filled with rage against our family and all of a sudden say, "I hate you. I just listened to the sermon at church and I'm not coming to Thanksgiving. Bye." No, that's not what Jesus is asking us. But Jesus is asking us to see ourselves as distinct from our families and from our possessions. He's asking us to see our families and everything else that is so important to us in light of our ultimate connection or attachment to him. Jesus is focusing on how we are connected to him. But that doesn't make Jesus' words any easier for me. Being detached from my family so that I can be deeply attached to Jesus and deeply connected to Jesus is still a really tall order. Jesus' words about the cost of following him are hard to hear. Now, 3 weeks ago when we started this teaching series called Finding Financial Peace, Pastor Dan asked us to close our eyes and to imagine our bestest lives. And he got that cool word bestest from me. I made it up. I'm really proud of that. And I actually followed the directions. I closed my eyes. I know there were some Lutherans out there who were saying, I'm not going to close my eyes and follow you on this. But I closed my eyes, and he asked us to think about what our best life looks like and what kinds of things do we have in it. And so I remember I started to think about having a bigger kitchen and having a bigger eating area, dining area, and having a bigger table so that I could better accommodate all my family and friends who come over for meals. But then I started thinking about family. Once I started thinking about those things in my life. And I started thinking about family members that were no longer present. And maybe I went there because it also happened to be All Saints Sunday. And we lit candles up front, and we rang bells, and we remembered especially our saints who have passed away, those special people in our lives who have shaped our lives in some way, who are now at home with God, who are a part of that great cloud of witnesses. So instead of imagining things in my bestest life, I started imagining people in my bestest life. And I imagined what life would look like if 8 years ago our daughter wouldn't have passed away before she reached 2 years old. I started thinking, what would it be like if we had a 10-year-old daughter at our house right now, in addition to our 5-year-old son? What would that life look like? Would she be out in the backyard playing soccer with her friends? Would she be in her room practicing her violin? Or more likely, would she be picking on her brother and we'd be negotiating their relationship? It was nice for just a moment to imagine that other life, to imagine what that would look like. But then when I came back to myself, I realized I'm still thankful for the actual life I'm living, for the people that I'm sharing my life with in the here and now. Even though this teaching series has been about finances and the role of money in our lives, it's hard to separate finances from family. I think that the way we spend our money is connected to who we share our lives with. And that brings me back to Jesus' words about the cost of following him. Jesus gave that large crowd 2 examples of what it would be like to calculate the cost of following him. He first gives the example of a building project. He says, before you add an addition to your house, you try to figure out how much the whole thing is going to cost and if you can afford it before you get going on that project. And you're going to try to figure out, is this something you can do yourself? Is this something that you have to hire out to have done? How much time and money are you willing or are you able to put towards this project? It isn't the smartest plan to just start knocking down walls and then trying to figure out if you can afford to finish the project. Although, don't tell my husband, he actually has started a lot of projects that way, and we're not going to get into all the walls and things he's taken apart and then figured out. Okay, that's a different story. But Jesus gives that example of a building project. But then he also gives another example of a king who's making the calculation onto whether to go into war or not. And so he thinks, okay, with 10,000 troops that I have, could they feasibly win this battle against 20,000 troops that other king has? And if he doesn't think his 10,000 troops can win, then he's not going to send them into harm's way. He's going to negotiate a peace settlement at the beginning. But then after these 2 examples of the building project and the battle plan, Jesus finally says this: none of you can become my disciples if you do not give up all of your possessions. Whoa. He's saying it will cost you everything to follow me. That kind of cancels out what Jesus had just been saying about comparing following him to a building project or a battle plan. That sounds a lot bigger and a lot harder. I actually think Jesus is way ahead of us. And maybe Jesus gives those 2 examples just to give everyone time to catch up to where he's at. I think he's waiting for us to figure out that we're the ones who actually make it too hard to follow, because we're trying to figure out how can we follow and also still be in charge of everything in our lives. Jesus is basically laying it out for us. The cost of following him includes our families, our building projects, our battle plans, our possessions, in short, our entire lives. To follow Jesus, it costs a life. But then I started to think, how many lives do I have? How many lives do each of us have? We each have one life, and that's how much it costs. It's a pretty fair deal, actually. The richest person in the whole world has one life. The poorest person in the whole world has one life. We each have one life. So how will you spend your one life? And are you willing to live your life deeply connected to Jesus and to see your family, your plans, your possessions, everything you have in light of the relationship that you have with your Savior? I think the difficulty comes when there's a gap between what Jesus has called us to and how we're actually living. Sometimes we spend our time and our money and our lives in ways that are at odds with our calling as Jesus' followers. In this culture, we say that family is important to us, but statistically, most of us have actually overcommitted ourselves financially. Most of us live beyond our means, which means most of us are forced to work more jobs or more hours, or live with more stress or more debt, more fear of the future, more strain on our relationships, and thus not actually having all that much time for our families. It's a stressful roller coaster for us. We get trapped doing what Dave Ramsey says we do, when we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. Maybe we even do like the people we're trying to impress, but why are we buying it for them? So I ask again, how are you spending your one life? And who are you spending it for? I have this quote on my laptop that says, "Your priorities aren't what you say they are revealed by how you live." Jesus invites us to live differently. At church, we sometimes just talk about money only in terms of the amount of money that you might share with us in your offerings. We encourage people to work up towards a tithe, which is 10% of your income. But that's not the complete picture. It gives everyone the impression that God only cares about 10%, and God doesn't care what we do with the other 90% of the income that we have. The truth is, as followers of Jesus, God is in charge of 100% of it, of all of it. God is in charge of the portion that we choose to share with our church family, and God is in charge of the portion that we divvy up for our housing, our transportation, all of our family budget needs, the things, our savings, our things that we would consider part of our disposable income. When we view our entire lives in light of our connection to Jesus, all of our spending decisions are an opportunity for us to follow Jesus and to be disciples. We can ask questions like, how much house do I really need? What kind of car do I really need to get from point A to point B? What needs to be included in our family budget? And then here's the ultimate question. How much does it cost to be saved? Just one life. And you know what? Jesus already paid that price with his own life for us. Everything that we're doing is just in response to that. So if you want to live like no one else, live your life connected to Jesus Christ. And I hope that you all do have a wonderful Thanksgiving, whether you're spending it on your own or with friends or with family or with people you consider part of your chosen family. But I also hope and pray that you see all of those relationships in light of your ultimate connection to our Savior. Amen.